Unit 1, Lesson 1, The Civil War. Weekly goals for this week are to examine how the United States changed because of the Civil War and Reconstruction efforts in the 19th century. Our essential question for this lesson is, how did the economic, political, and social beliefs contribute to the division of the country? Today, we are going to examine the causes of the Civil War, the key battles for both the North and the South, the key people involved in the military, in politics, and civilians, and we'll look at the lasting effects of the Civil War in a short video presentation. The causes of the Civil War. Farmers in the North began to specialize in one or two crops or types of livestock, such as corn and cattle, sell what they produced to urban markets, and then purchase what they needed from stores. Often, the items purchased were made in northern factories. As a result, a market economy began to develop in which agriculture and manufacturing each supported the growth of the other. Meanwhile, the South continued to grow as an agricultural power. Eli Whitney's invention of a cotton gin, short for engine, or machine, in 1793 made it possible for Southern farmers to produce cotton more profitably. The emergence of a cotton kingdom in the South, and thus the need for more field labor, contributed to the expansion of slavery. Between 1790 and 1820, the enslaved population increased from less than 700,000 to over 1.5 million. In the North, things were different. By 1804, states north of Delaware had either abolished slavery or had enacted laws for gradual emancipation. Slavery declined in the North, but some slaves remained there for decades. Political causes of the Civil War. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 required slaves to be returned to their owners if they were caught in northern free states. It allowed anyone to report an African American as a slave anywhere in the United States, even if they were born a free man. The Missouri Compromise was a federal law allowing slavery in new state of Missouri and all states below Missouri, as seen here on the map in the red states. The Missouri Compromise allowed Maine to be entered into the Union as a free state of the North. The Kansas-Nebraska Act repealed the Missouri Compromise. On January 4, 1854, Illinois Senator Stephen Douglas introduced a bill designed to tread middle ground. He proposed organizing the vast territory now known as Kansas, Nebraska, and the Dakotas, with or without slavery, as their constitutions may prescribe. This was known as popular sovereignty. This policy contradicted the Missouri Compromise and left open the question of slavery. The Dred Scott decision was the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling on March 6, 1857, that although having lived in a free state and territory, this did not entitle an enslaved person, Dred Scott in this case, to his freedom. Scott was a Southern slave who had been taken north to work for 2 years. Scott argued in the court of law that having worked and lived in a free state meant he was a free man and no longer subject to slavery. In essence, the decision argued that, as someone's property, Scott was not a citizen, but a commodity, and could not sue in a federal court. The Supreme Court's ruling was seen as a near fatal blow for abolitionists. Social causes of the Civil War. Northerners supported the end of slavery for religious, moral, and economical reasons, while Southerners insisted slavery was necessary for their way of life to continue. The presidential election of 1860 saw Abraham Lincoln winning the presidency narrowly, as he was the first Republican candidate to win the presidency. He strongly opposed slavery. This caused many Northerners to rally to his candidacy and his defense. Abraham Lincoln's election caused 7 states to secede from the Union immediately. The first state, South Carolina, left the Union on December 20th, 1860, followed very soon by Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. These 7 states initially formed the Confederate States of America. Now, we are going to work on this activity for about 10 minutes. You each have a handout with a small copy of this map. Please work in your table groups to locate, identify, and map out the Union states, the border states, and the Confederate states on your worksheet. Key people of the Civil War: President Abraham Lincoln, General Ulysses S. Grant, writer Frederick Douglass, abolitionist John Brown, Jefferson Davis, General Robert E. Lee. Abraham Lincoln was the 16th President of the United States and the first Republican elected to that office. Lincoln was president during the Civil War, with his election being cited by Southern states as one of the reasons for their secession. Lincoln's 2 terms in office saw the Union defeat the Confederacy and the abolition of slavery in the United States. President Lincoln was assassinated in 1865, the first American president to die in that matter. General Ulysses S. Grant was the supreme Union general during the Civil War and then later the 18th President of the United States. Grant was instrumental in the battlefield defeat of the Confederacy and then as president worked to implement Reconstruction and put the Union back together. Frederick Douglass was a major African American abolitionist, reformer, and writer. Douglass, who escaped slavery himself, was famous before and during the Civil War as an orator and writer fighting for abolition. His 1845 autobiography, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, detailed his life as a slave and is still read today. John Brown was a prominent abolitionist. Brown believed that slavery could only be overthrown violently. He became famous during the Bloody Kansas period in 1856, when he and his supporters murdered pro-slavery Southerners and in 1859 attacked the Federal Armory at Harper's Ferry in Virginia. Brown hoped that by doing so he would start a slave insurrection. The raid at Harper's Ferry ended in failure. 7 people were killed and at least 10 wounded. He was tried and executed by hanging. His death was considered inspirational in the North, particularly among abolitionists who viewed him as a martyr. Jefferson Davis was a former Secretary of War under President Franklin Pierce and senator from Mississippi who became the first president of the Confederacy. He was seen as an ineffective leader, particularly given the wartime situation and in comparison with Abraham Lincoln. Davis was captured after the war and imprisoned for 2 years. Robert E. Lee was the Confederate general in charge of the Army of Northern Virginia, and at the end of the war, supreme commander of the remaining Confederate forces. Lee was considered to be one of the finest generals in the United States at the outbreak of secession and was offered command of Union armies, but declined. When Virginia left the Union, Lee remained loyal to his home state and became a general for the Confederacy. Lee's surrender in 1865 marked the end of the Civil War, and Lee himself strongly supported reconciliation between the North and South. After the war, Lee became the president of what is today known as Washington and Lee University. Important Civil War battle timeline. April 12, 1861. First shots of the Civil War happened at Fort Sumter, just outside of Charlestown, South Carolina, when Confederate forces opened fire on the Union Army. July 21st, 1861. First casualties of the Civil War at the Battle of Bull Run. February 11th, 1862. General Ulysses S. Grant leads his army for the first time in battle to victory and kills over 15,000 Confederate soldiers, while losing only 2,000 of his Union soldiers. July 3rd, 1863. Turning point in the Civil War at the Battle of Gettysburg. Over 50,000 Americans died in this battle alone. July 22nd, 1864. Battle of Atlanta, one of the last major battles, heavily in favor of the Union, in the heart of the Deep South, broke the morale of many Southerners. April 9, 1865. Nearly 4 years after the first shots were fired, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered at the Appomattox Courthouse. Over 700 men died earlier that day. President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation freed enslaved persons only in the rebelling states. Here's a video to detail why. Though the Emancipation Proclamation did not end slavery in the nation, it captured the hearts and imagination of millions of Americans and fundamentally transformed the character of the war. After January 1st, 1863, every advance of federal troops expanded the domain of freedom. Moreover, the proclamation announced the acceptance of black men into the Union Army and Navy, enabling the liberated to become liberators. By the end of the war, almost 200,000 black soldiers and sailors had fought for the Union and freedom. From the first days of the Civil War, slaves had acted to secure their own liberty. The Emancipation Proclamation confirmed their insistence that the war for the Union must become a war for freedom. It added moral force to the Union cause and strengthened the Union both militarily and politically. As a milestone along the road to slavery's final destruction, the Emancipation Proclamation has assumed a place among the great documents of human freedom. The Southern States surrender at Appomattox on April 9, 1865, in Virginia, as General Robert E. Lee and 28,000 Confederate troops under his command surrender to General Ulysses S. Grant. Why the Civil War matters now. The federal government established supreme authority, and no state has threatened secession since. Now we'll watch a short video about the aftermath of the Civil War.